Hello friends and a very good morning. My name is Swapnil and in this video we will learn how to handle employee hierarchy in Power BI. First, let's have a look at the dataset. We have an employee table and a sales table. In sales table we have the employees and their respective sales amount, and in employees table we have the reporting structure. So L1, L2, L3 are the managerial roles. So L1 is the topmost and L3 is the bottommost. We also have the employee ID of the employees. Now let's have a preview of what we are trying to implement in this particular session. So we have a L1, L2, 3 as the slices and we have the in the center we have the sales amount as the total shown in a card. So now if a person logs in, for example Akash logs in, so he should be able to see the data relevant to him. So here we will type the email ID of Akash, essence of learning.in. So once we enter the email ID of Akash, we are able to see that the sales amount changed and now the level structure also changed. So this particular screen only depicts the data relevant to Akash. So if Akash want to see how much sales Suhas has made, he can see that. How much sales Devendra has made, he can see that. So this was an overall view of what we wanted to implement. So now let's see the steps that will perform. Here, the first step is to join the employee table and the sales table. So why we are doing this? Because we want just one table, which we want so that we'll have only one table to deal with. We'll get the sales data into the employee table. Okay. The second step is creating new columns for L1, L2, L3. So basically in these new columns, we'll have the email IDs, respective email IDs of the person in the L1, L2, and L3. This we are creating because it would be easy for us to filter out the data in the case of RLS. Okay. Third is to create a measure which will handle the sales amount calculation. Okay. And the fourth one is actual implementation of row level security. Okay. So let's get started. So we have seen the data set. We have the employee table and the sales table. Now what we have to do is basically join the two tables. For that, we'll click on the home tab, and under that we have the transform data option and click on transform data. So that will open the Power Query editor. So Power Query editor. Okay. So Power Query editor is basically useful for doing all the ETL operations. Okay. So in the home tab, we'll select the merge queries. We'll click on merge queries. We have to merge employee table and the sales data table. So in the second section, we'll select the sales table and we'll select the point of join. So that is the employee column basically. And then we'll click on OK. So now we have a new table here, sorry, a new column here in the table, employee table. We'll select the column that we want to show from the sales table, which is sales data. So now we have the sales column here in the table employee. Now, since the sales table is not useful now, we'll uncheck the enable load option. That will basically help us to retain the data here in this Power Query editor, but it will not load the data to the uh, front end. Now, as we discussed, we'll create the three new columns. So first, let's start with the L3 email IDs. So for that, we'll select the L3 column and the email ID, and then we'll click on this option columns from example, which is under the add column tab. Okay. So here we'll select the from selection option. So why we selected L3 and the email ID? Because when we start entering the uh, details for this column, so we'll get this service option from the two columns. So here, what we want is basically email ID of the person Akash. So in L3 we have first Akash. So we have written the email ID of Akash. Similarly, the second person is Vijay. So we'll take the email ID of Vijay. Is not capital. Third one is again Akash. So we'll just copy the first occurrence of Akash email ID and we'll paste it below. So now Power BI engine was smart enough to fill up the below rows with the relevant email ID of the persons in the L3 column. So since Power BI has done the work, so we'll just now rename this column as L3 email ID and then click on OK. So we have created the first column. Now likewise, we'll create the other two also. So we'll select L1 and then the email ID and then we'll click on from selection. We'll do the same step. So the first one is Akash. The second one is Vijay. The third one is Akash again. So we'll copy this. Then okay. So again, Power BI has done the work for us. It has really made our work easy, right? So we'll rename the column and then we'll click on OK. And in the same fashion, we'll make the column for L1. We'll rename it as L1 email ID and then we'll use Akash email ID. Then second is also Akash email ID. Then third one is again Akash email ID. Hooray. Again, Power BI was intelligent enough to understand what we wanted here. So I guess our employee table is very much comprehensive. What all we want, we have taken into one single table. So now it's easy. We don't have to perform any join operations and all that. Okay. So let's go ahead and save this, apply the steps, and then we'll close this particular Power Query editor and move on to the front end part of the Power BI. So let's close this. We have closed the Power Query editor. Now we can see what all changes that we have done are reflected into the data tab, right? So you can also see that we only have the employee table. The sales table is not here. Now we'll go to the front, the canvas part. So for simplicity, I have already taken the three slices L1, L2, and L3. And now what we have to do is basically create the measure which will be responsible for the sales data calculation, the total sales calculation, right? So we'll rename it as total sales. We'll move on to the new line. So for that, what we have to press is Alt plus Enter. Okay. So what we have to calculate is sum of sales. So we have given the sales column parameter to the sum function. Okay. But the context is if I select something from the level one, it should get filtered. Okay. So let's look for the level one first. We have to use a filter expression. So for that, we'll use a calculate function. So for calculate function, sum of the column is the first expression, and the second expression is basically the filter part. So we'll write filter. What we have to filter is the employee table. And what is the condition of filter? Condition of filter is basically the employee L1 should be equal to the selected value. So selected value is a function which returns whatever is selected in this L1 slicer, right? So L1 slicer is basically the L1 column. Okay. So we have this first calculate function ready for us. Now this was only done for the L1 level. we have to also repeat these steps for the L2, L3 also. Okay. So it's not necessary that every time every level is selected. It can happen that sometimes L1 is selected, sometimes L2 is selected. So we'll have to identify what is selected. Okay. So for that, we'll use a if condition. So if selected value of L1, if something is selected, then return the selected value, or else return 0. That's what this particular function says. Selected value function, it says if something is selected, then return the selected value. Okay. If nothing is selected, then return 0. So what we'll do is, if the expression resultant is 0, then don't do this uh, third line expression, that is the calculate. Don't execute this. Okay. If it is not equal to 0, then execute this calculate statement. So now this calculate statement has become the first parameter or the true part of this if condition, right? So we'll have to give the false condition, that is the else part. Then we'll again check if selected value of employee table L2, basically the L2 slicer, if it's not equal to 0, then perform a calculation operation, which is basically this. We'll copy paste that and just change the column name. So here we are writing it for L2. Perfect. So we have also executed the same thing for L2. Now the last one left is the L3 slicer. So selected value of employee table L3 column. If the resultant output is 0, then don't perform this calculate operation, else perform this calculate operation. So we'll change the column name, so it's L3. Okay. We have done that. So if so what should be done if it is 0? Then basically we'll return the total sales amount without any filters. Okay. So how do we calculate that total sales amount? We'll basically copy paste the sum expression, just the sum expression. Okay, perfect. So we'll write this sum expression as the last expression, the last part. Okay, so I think we are ready with this total sales measure. So I'll just click on enter to save that particular measure, and let's see if any error message comes. I guess no error message is there, so we'll just utilize this total sales measure here in the card. So we have the total sales amount here. Great. So let's check if it changes with the filter selection or the slicer selection. Okay. We'll uncheck Gaurav and select Devraj. Okay, perfect. So it's working perfectly. So now what we have to do is basically implement the row level security. Okay. So we'll go to the modeling section and then click on manage rules. So here what we have to do, basically there is something, we'll just delete this out. We'll delete the role as well. Okay, perfect. So what we have to do, first we'll create a role. Maybe it's manager role. Okay. And what we have to do basically, if Akash logs in, so we should filter out the data relevant to Akash. If Devraj logs in, we have to filter the data according to Devraj. So, and there are three levels here. So we'll have to apply the filter for all the three levels. So what we'll do, basically whatever expression that we write here, just read out this particular line, filter the data that this role can see by entering a DAX filter expression that returns a true or false value. So whatever expression that we write here, the resultant value of that expression should either be a true or it should be a false. Okay. So what we'll do basically is we'll use the uh, this email IDs column that we have generated, because uh, we use the email ID because when once we publish this particular report to Power BI service, we can just retrieve the email ID of the person who is logging in. That is possible. That is the easiest method. So we are using the email ID. So the function for that is user principal name. Principal name. So what we are doing is we are saying user principal name is equal to L1 email ID. In behind the scenes, what it will do is basically it will equate the two values. If they are true, if they are equal, then it's true, or else it is false. So similarly, we'll write this expression for the other columns also. Okay. So the other columns are L2 email ID and the last column is L3 email ID. So we have used an OR operator in between. Okay. So let's see if the condition is true. Is correct. Yes, it's correct. And we'll click on save. Now we are ready with our RLS also. So we'll just check if everything is working correctly. So let's check that out. So we'll click on view as and then select other user and select the role that we have created, and we'll enter the Akash email ID. Akash at the rate essence of learning.in. Okay, so the data should get filtered and we should be able to see only data related to Akash. Perfect. So only Akash is there at the top level and we have the total sales amount relevant to Akash. We can see whatever the data is relevant for Suhas also and then for Vijay also, right? So everything is working fine now. So let's see the data. Before seeing the data, let's check for another user. So I'll click on view as again, and maybe I should check for Suhas. Suhas. Okay. So Suhas. Next range. Click on OK. So let's wait for the data to get filtered. I think it should get proper result. Okay, so now we are able to see that Suhas is also here and Akash is also here. So let's go to the data part and see what is there. So in L1 we found Suhas is there, but Akash, how come Akash is here? So let's move on to the L2 column. Okay, so Suhas is there in L2 email ID, because of which since we have used an OR operator in between the condition that we have written in the manage roles section, so it's allowing this particular row also to be there in the data set or this particular table. So if this particular condition is useful to you, then you can keep it like this. But if the requirement of whatever the requirement you have got doesn't allow you to uh, represent the data like this, maybe the requirement for you is if the person is there in L1, then only the rows relevant to that particular person should be there. Means since Suhas is there in L1 column, L1 email ID, and so the first four rows should be there, but the fifth row should not be there. That is also possible. We'll try to do that particular. We'll try to perform that particular operation as well. So okay, so good. Let's go to the manage role section. So here, what we'll do, we'll write an expressions for the condition that we just, or the scenario that just discussed. So writing that particular expression here is a bit more uh, it's more tedious because it doesn't allow any service here, means we don't get any service here. So what we'll do, we'll save this for now, and we'll try to write that particular expression in this, in a measure, because that it's a simple way of writing a DAX expression in for a measure, because it gives us service, right? So by service, what I mean is, I'll just show you that. So I'm trying to create a new measure here. Okay, so let's go to a new line. So if I type if, I can see some help messages are there. These I called as this service. These are called as this service. So I can see there are some three parameters that I need to give, and what other functions are also there. So it's helpful. So writing a DAX expression in this particular context is very easy rather than on the manage role section. Okay, so we'll write an if condition. Okay, so if, what you have to check, we have to check for the individual level, for L1 individually, for L2 individually, and for L3 individually. So it's an if or else condition. So if is true, then that particular calculation should be performed. If else is true, then if part is not calculated, only else part is calculated. So like that we'll do the operation. So now what we have to do is basically, if we found, so we'll do a lookup operation here. So lookup is basically a, similar to VLOOKUP in Excel. So anyone who has used Excel and implemented a VLOOKUP function, it's similar to that. Only there is some parameters here and there. Okay. So we can see some service. We can see some help message that Power BI has shown us. So first column is our result column. So the result column I want is basically the L1 email ID, the first column. The second column is what column you want to search in employee table. I want to search the same column, that is L1 employee ID, and what value you want to search. What value I want to search is basically the user principal name output, right? This is the function that will give us the person who has logged in, the email ID of person who has logged in. Okay. So if this particular condition, the value of lookup is not blank, means the person is there in this L1 column. Okay, if it is not blank, so the person is there in L1 column. So what we have to do is basically you have to filter that data. Control C. What we have to do is filter out the data as per the user principal name. Okay. Perfect. So our if condition is ready, the first if condition for L1. Likewise, we have to write for the L2 and L3. Here you are able to see some error message. Red line is there, but don't worry, it's correct. Uh, it is from the point of view of the manager role context, because there we have to give an expression which is either true or false, right? So we'll keep it like that, and we'll just move on to the next expression. So Control C, and then we'll press Alt Enter, and then change the column name just. So this particular expression is for L2. So we'll just change the column name as L2. Filter the L2 column if you found in L2. Okay, and similarly for L3. So L3, sorry, L3, again L3, and the last value L3. Okay, so we have written that a particular expression, and if the value is not found anywhere, means uh, the basically if there is no filter, or basically if nothing is filtered out, so what should be returned? So it should basically return a true expression wherein all the data is shown. Okay. So we are ready with the expression. So we'll just copy this part and we'll keep the measure like as is. We'll delete it afterwards, and then we'll move on to the modeling section and to the manage roles, and then here we'll just paste that expression. Okay, perfect. So we'll just check if anything error is, if any error is there. Nothing. So we'll just save that expression. This measure we can delete for now. So let's delete this measure. Perfect. So here I can see only Suhas is here. Just let's go to the, yeah, in the data part also we can see the fifth line has been removed. Only Suhas related information. If Suhas occurs in the L1 column first, then only uh, the rows are there. Then only the rows are following the true condition or gives the resultant as true. Okay, so we are good to go. I guess we have completed what we wanted to. So basically, this was all about the handling of row level security and also the employee hierarchy. So let me know if that was this was of any use to you, and if it's helpful. If you have any other condition to solve, let me know. If I'm able to help you, that is nothing like that. So if you have liked this video, then please give likes. Please press on the thumb icon, and if you want to keep learning, then please subscribe and press the bell icon to get notified. Okay. So thank you guys. Thank you for watching this video. Have a nice day.